Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Unleash Your Voice. I'm your host, Priya Sam, and I have a very special guest today, one of the incredible women who recently graduated from the Unleash program. Amie Lewis has one of the most interesting jobs. She's a senior program officer at the International Association of Women Judges, where she leads a program that is focused on advancing gender equity in judiciaries across the global South. We're going to hear so much more about that during today's episode. Welcome to Unleash Your Voice, Amie.
Hi, Priya. It's so good to be here.
It's great to have you. This is a full circle moment in so many ways for us because we used to live together in South Korea teaching English, which feels like a completely different lifetime. And we can talk more about that later, but I feel like most of what happened there is under lock and key.
Yes, for sure.
What I love is that now I also get to see the career that you've built, how you've been stepping into your voice, especially recently after graduating from the Unleash program. It's been incredible to watch. So let me start with a question I ask every guest. Tell me about a time when you unleashed your voice.
You know, that's such an interesting question because I've always been a person that I feel like really tried to utilize their voice. But what I really thought was that I needed to use my voice for other people, to do justice work, to make meaningful contributions and impact the lives of others. And I don't think that I had really kind of crystallized using my voice for myself, right? And kind of maybe touting myself or putting myself forward as like a subject matter expert or somebody that really belonged on an international stage speaking about law and justice and women's issues. So honestly, I think it came a bit late in life for me and obviously through the Unleash program too. But really when I started working at the International Association of Women Judges or IAWJ, and it wasn't instant, honestly. I think it took, I had past job trauma, I had other things on my journey, but I think that I work at a really feminist organization. I work in a really supportive environment. I consider one of my supervisors to be such a mentor to me. And I think in that environment, I was really just able to thrive. And so I think through that and getting opportunities to speak on an international stage, getting an opportunity to work with other global partners, literally across the world, I think really helped hone that for me. And we can talk more later, but overcoming the imposter syndrome and being like, no, I belong here. And like I said, it's honestly been pretty recent. The Unleash program made a huge difference in just me being able to recognize that I was kind of already using my voice and then just leaning into that and being more confident in that.
You said a couple of things that I know like people who are listening to this right now are just nodding along. Like the first one is how you were able to use your voice to advocate for others quite easily, right? Like that's always come to you very naturally, but then all of a sudden having to turn and do it for yourself, it's a completely different experience. And then the other thing you said was about the environment that you're in. I always think of this quote, you can't grow when you're planted in the wrong place. And I think like it just really aligns with what you said, where when you're in those toxic work environments, when you don't have supportive leaders and bosses, it doesn't create an environment where you can advocate for yourself or you even want to, right? Most of the time in those work environments, we're just in survival mode the whole time. But now you're in a place where you can do that, where you are supported. And I even remember you saying that one of your leaders said to you, never apologize for advocating for yourself. And I remember when you told me that, I was like, can we clone this woman and have her lead everyone? Because that's how it should be, right? But it just really isn't always that way. So I really appreciate what you're saying about how this isn't something that happens overnight. It happens over time. And there are a lot of factors that are, some of them are external, but and some of them are internal too.
Absolutely. And I think, I've worked in the legal field for most of my career post teaching English in South Korea. And, it is a very structured, it is a very rigid environment. It's very male dominated, particularly in the US where I'm based, but throughout the world, really. And I think it's a different environment when you are working for a feminist organization. It's a different environment when you're surrounded by men and women who have those types of values. And I think that it really is so life-changing to be in a job where you feel supported, to feel in a job where you feel like your peers or your superiors are also advocating for you. Because I think that's the other thing. I talk about this a lot generally, but women opening doors for other women, and especially at the organization that I'm at now, I truly feel like my supervisors have given me opportunities to grow, right? I mean, I am kind of a mid-level at my organization, and to be able to represent the organization in front of donors, in front of partners on, like I said, on a global stage, obviously they trust me and they see something in me that I initially wasn't seeing in myself, or that had been kind of, pushed out of me by other environments. And so I think it was always there. I just needed somebody to help me kind of open it up. And I will say that the job helped with that. But again, the Unleash program, and there's something, I'm going to talk a lot about my feminist perspective. So forgive me now, but there is something about being in a group of women and the community that is, especially in the environment that we're in, especially in the climate we're in right now. And there's something about that community that's just really special and is really empowering.
I totally agree. It's one of the experiences that it's almost hard to explain until you actually are in it. But it is one of the most powerful things about the Unleash program is the group itself. And those days I find, when you see somebody else making a bold move, you just realize like, okay, well, I can do that too. Right. And then the next week you're the one making the bold move and somebody else is saying, wow, if Amie can do that, I can do that too. And I call it borrowing confidence. Sometimes when we don't like have that full confidence yet, we're getting there. You do need to borrow it from other people. And those are the moments when somebody is like doing something incredible where you're like, I just need to borrow a little bit of that magic for myself. And that's what happens in a group environment. So, yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think about you and I in our first conversation we had before you joined the program and how you already saw this. You were like, I know that I'm not advocating for myself in the way that I should be. And you found your voice through story, right? And like really also through seeing the value in your own story. I think that was, from what I saw, that was a game changer for you during the program. Do you agree?
Oh, 100%. I,
Yeah.
I actually think that there's something powerful too about seeing yourself through other people's eyes in a positive way, of course, right?
Yeah.
And the Unleash program, of course, and being in community with women, I feel like I was a little bit of an outlier in terms of my profession. There were a lot of tech or sales or business women. And so to them, I was kind of the anomaly, and like, oh, you're doing this like social justice work, and I was like, "Oh, they think my job is cool. They think the work that I'm doing is impressive." And it's like, "Wait, is it?" Like,
Yeah.
even like anecdotally, I was at ceramics class last night and somebody asked me what I did because, and I immediately thought of you, and I thought of my like, tell me about yourself stories. And I started telling them about my job, and they're like, "Oh my God, that is so cool. Like, you're like out here doing the work for women." And I was like, I guess I kind of am, and like really just honestly seeing it through other people's eyes. Cause I think sometimes when you're in it, it's harder. But being part of that cohort, I think also when you are lacking confidence and other people can be like, no, look at what you've done from like a realistic perspective, not a self doubt, not an anxious place. Like, I think it really does make a difference. And I don't think I realized how much I needed that support. I talk about it at work all the time because we are a membership organization. We have associations of women
Mhm.
judges all over the world, and we talk about community and solidarity and women's networks being so empowering and uplifting. It's like, oh, maybe you should practice what you preach, Amie.
And it's another situation where you're like, okay, I should also do this for myself. Every time you spoke in the group about your work, everyone was, you're right. Like everyone was so fascinated, so interested, and so supportive because it is really incredible work. And I would actually love for you to share more with the podcast audience today about your job because I said your title, right? Senior Program Officer for Women in Leadership in Law at the International Association of Women Judges. But what exactly does that mean? Like, what do you do?
What do I do? So, you
The
know,
$1,000,000
I
question.
Yeah, I say I'm so lucky, honestly, that I found this like perfect trifecta. So I sit at kind of the intersection of law, feminism, and international development. So, like I said, at IAWJ, we're a membership based organization. So, we have women judges associations, or sometimes we call them chapters, all throughout the world. We have in over 100 countries and jurisdictions, so we work by and through those associations. And so I actually run a program, as you said, called Women in Leadership and Law, and we're piloting it. But the overall goal is to create what we call an enabling environment for women judges to not only enter the profession, but rise and thrive in their judiciaries. So, in short, what that means, let's get more women into leadership. Let's get more women on the bench. Let's get more women in the upper echelons of the courts so that we can have justice that is representative and responsive to the needs of the communities that it serves. So, I really get to be out there and say, hey, let's get gender parity, let's get gender equality. And we do that through a number of things, right? Like I said, collaborative empowerment networks, policy reform, support networks, mentorship, sponsorship. So I run a lot of different programs, but that is the overall goal for everything.
So incredible. And I can hear your passion for your work every time you talk about it. Like you can see it in your voice and your whole face lights up. And I wonder, could you give us a couple of examples of some of the initiatives that you've worked on or some of the specific projects?
Yeah, I would love to. One of my favorite ones is coming out right now out of the Philippines. And it is kind of similar to what we're doing with our women judges associations generally, but it's a bit more tailored. So, a bit of a niche problem for judges, but often when you get promoted, you get transferred to another location. So, it may be like, think of the Philippines, right? So many islands, you could be transferred to a kind of far-flung region where maybe there's a regional dialect, a different language. But if you're a woman who's early in her career, maybe you have a partner, maybe you have children, what schools are they going to go to? Where are you going to find housing? What's the community like? How are you going to find a support system there for you, your partner, your children? And so they set up this committee to basically do just that. And they're calling it a logistics and support committee. And they're building a database of resources across the country. And they've set up regional directors to kind of help with this kind of ushering in when women are transferred to these kind of more remote locations. In contrast, in Nigeria, we're working on comprehensive policy reform, right? Where we're looking at getting a gender quota into the judiciary for how many women are appointed versus how many men. We're looking at some anti-discrimination laws. We're looking at also care infrastructure there, getting court adjacent childcare or nurseries. Again, the overall goal is to get women to enter the judiciary, but also to keep them there, right? We know that women leave because of, we call it pipeline leaks, but they may leave because they're in the early stages of making their family happen. They may leave for other care responsibilities. And so how can we mitigate some of those outside factors and then simultaneously change the institution so it's a more supportive environment through things like policy reform? In South Africa, we helped get adopted a judiciary-wide sexual harassment policy.
Wow.
And yeah, so it really runs the gamut. But like I said, the idea is, in each country, what are the barriers that women are experiencing? And what can we do to change the institution so those barriers no longer exist?
It's so powerful to hear about these like systemic changes that you're making because it obviously makes a difference in the lives of women today, but it's also future building, right? And kind of future proofing and making like paving this more clear path for the next generation of women who are going to come up behind them. Yeah, it's so incredible and inspiring.
Yeah. And I think, the other cool thing about my job, Priya, as you know, I also do a podcast with one of my colleagues, and I also am so into storytelling and value the importance of it so much. And I think that's why the program was also like so compelling to me, because I'm like, this really hits what I've been saying around the power of storytelling, not just for individuals, but also thinking more broadly. A lot of the initiatives we do are aimed at narrative change and social norms change too, right? So not just those immediate impacts, but like you said, the long term, what are the ramifications for women and girls down the line? What are the ramifications for men? Because these aren't just programs for women and girls. And it's not just justice for women and girls, right? It's justice for whole communities. And so how do we bring male allies along? How do we bring, you know, those fence sitters or maybe people that are opposition along so that they can see, what change could actually look like for everyone?
That is so important. That piece about everyone benefits from this. Like, we forget about that, but you're right. Like, it's not just about women, it's about their families, it's about entire communities. And we do need that allyship from men, like in the work that you do, even in the workplace, right? When we are trying to, like, here, advocate for better equity, for more women in leadership in corporate. Like, we do need allies. And also, like, honestly, women just shouldn't have to do the work alone in the first place.
We already have an overwhelming care burden. We already
Yes.
have, the emotional labor of so many things. But I was recently talking with someone, and something I've been thinking about a lot is this concept of what does feminist leadership look like, right?
Mm,
And I won't bore you with all the tenets of feminist leadership, but I will say this. Men can also be feminist leaders. Anyone on the gender spectrum can be a feminist leader. So it's really about how you carry yourself, how you
mhm.
advocate for your employees, what kind of environment you create in the workplace. And do your employees feel empowered? Do they feel like they have a voice? Do they feel like they're part of the solution? And that is not something exclusive to women at all. And that is why, but we do see when feminist leadership is taking root, that communities thrive, institutions reform. And that does benefit, like I said, the entire populace.
Yes. If we went back to our South Korea days and someone like had a crystal ball and said to you, "Hey, Amy, in a decade, like you're going to be working in global programs advancing women in leadership in law across around the world," like, would you have believed them?
No. There are definitely days that I'm like, how is this my job? This is amazing. And also, who am I? And I hearkened to it a little bit in the intro about the imposter syndrome, but like
Mhm.
for me, and obviously, Priya, my background a little bit, but like I grew up in the US in a state called Illinois, but I always tell people 4 hours south of Chicago. I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere. I mean, literally a village. You cannot get any more rural than how I grew up. So, people don't leave. People don't leave. I was the first in my family to go to college, let alone have a master's degree. So, even moving abroad, that was so outside the comfort zone of my family. And I thought I was going to go do Peace Corps. I thought I was going to, keep doing fighting the good fight. And part of the reason that I, wanted to live abroad is because I wanted to like experience new things, understand different cultures. I knew that I wasn't super keen on the way that my culture was doing a lot of things, so I wanted to like understand different ways of being and living. And that has broadened my perspective so much.
Mhm.
But I probably would have told you that eventually I'll go to law school and I'll probably end up in a law firm and my life will just be, this very linear, set, structured path. It has been not like that at all. And I'm so thankful for it, honestly. And it led me to here. I do my background, my master's is in women's studies and government. So it's not totally by chance. But I think landing, like I said, at this perfect trifecta, it does sometimes feel a bit serendipitous. And I have to remind myself, no, you worked for this.
Yeah.
Like you put in the legwork, you put in the hours, and you deserve to be here. And I think that's been something that sometimes has been really hard for me to admit, let alone say out loud.
Especially when you come from a background where you didn't see the people around you doing what you're doing, traveling the world, going to university, college, like getting a master's degree. What do you think it was that propelled you or compelled you to pursue that path that you hadn't seen other people walk?
I've always had a strong sense of justice.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think that I saw a lot of the things that were going on in my world when I was younger, but I didn't know how to name them, right? And so I've also shared with people, I grew up in a pretty conservative religious family, and I think that shaped a lot of my worldview as well, but I will say this, for as conservative as my family was or could be, I had some very strong role models. And my father very much asked me or pushed me to ask questions, push me to not just accept the status quo. I remember even little things like, well, not so little things, but when I was younger, I was very active in the church. And so I wanted to be a preacher. I wanted to be a minister. And the church that I grew up in, that was not something women were able to do. And I was pretty abruptly told that. And I was immediately like, I don't understand these constraints. I don't understand like why there are different roles in society for men and women. It was something that always baffled me. And I think because honestly, I think sometimes when you're in poverty, you don't have the luxury of this
Yeah.
delegation of roles. My dad was a single father, so I didn't have the luxury of seeing this kind of binary nuclear family setup, right?
Yeah.
So I think some of those like early experiences really shaped me thinking, okay, if this is what normal is and I don't have normal, well, let's just keep going. Let's just keep pushing the boundaries. And I also knew that I wanted more than what I saw with my family and my community. And, initially I thought maybe I would be able to help bring some change there too. I don't think that's the role for me now because I've taken a different path, but am still very connected to where I grew up and in a lot of ways, like it is part of me. And I think it still defines who I am and changes how I show up in rooms. And I think also has shaped my career in ways that I didn't necessarily realize, right? I think it allows me to relate to people from different backgrounds. I came to DC and I am not your typical DC person. I'm not from an Ivy League school. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not from an upper middle class background. So a lot of people that come here to work have those privileges already embedded. And I think for me, it's like, you have to learn to navigate those spaces, but you also have to be able to relate to people in the communities that you're serving. So it's definitely been a journey, but I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for what I had to overcome because I think it has made me able to be a more fierce advocate for others.
100%. And that relatability piece, like you said, especially for you in the rooms that you're in, where you are working with people from different cultures with different life experiences every day, not everyone can navigate that in a way where they like are being sensitive to the needs of others, but also like you also have to show up with confidence and leadership in those situations. And that's a tough balance to strike, right? Like being able to lead with empathy and also of like some form of authority and leadership too.
And also, I think knowing when to give deference, right?
Yes.
I know there was
Yeah.
a story that I shared, I think, with the group in Unleash, but I think I even maybe have shared it on my LinkedIn at some point. And about, I'm in a room and these are high level judicial decision makers. I'm in West Africa. And so very culturally different than, where I'm from. And this man made some comment. Of course, we're talking about women's leadership and why we need more women in the judiciary about, well, who's going to make dinner if she is at work all day? And I was like, well, her husband will. And he just thought that was the most absurd thing. And of course, I was being a little snarky. I was being a little tongue in cheek, but it also opened the door because he was like, oh, she's funny. Oh, she's not just in here on her feminist high horse. I think it made him humanize me too, you know? And then we were able to build this rapport. And I will tell you that by the end of that workshop, this man was like, we're going to get more women on the bench. So, and I don't think that was just because of me. I'm not that hubristic, but I do think that that was a breakthrough moment where he was like, these are not my opposition. And there's something here because there were other powerful stories in the room. But I think what happened was it made him start to listen. And then he was open to other women's stories. He was open to the realities that the women in country were seeing. And he was able to be like, oh, this isn't just some American coming in here telling us what to do. This is in community with the women that are in my country.
That is such a perfect example of how to open a door, right? And you can't build the deep relationship, you can't make the progress if the door doesn't open in the first place. And I totally agree with you. I feel like that comment, that like moment of humor, that moment of like, haha, we're both like kind of like tongue in cheek talking about something that is a little uncomfortable, but also showing that we are human, both human in this moment. That does, it opens the door, and all of a sudden you're having a different conversation, you're relating on a different level. And that can be the hardest part, is just that first step, especially when, like you said, are these preconceived notions and like some kind of like, power imbalances going into an experience like that. Oh, I do love that story. That's one I will never forget that we talked about in the program. So, you mentioned not having a linear path. I'm curious now, that as you look back on your career, what would you say is the biggest turning point that led you to where you are today?
I've often said that it was coming to IAWJ, but I was thinking a little bit more about this and thinking back to like my younger self. And honestly, so there was this moment right after undergrad. I was kind of flailing a little bit. I had gotten accepted to law school, paid my deposit, and then was like, I'm not going. I got scared of many things, the debt and what we talked about before, my life having this like very set path. And I really wanted to explore the world. I really wanted to see what was out there. And I also really was like, how can you serve communities that you don't understand? So I was working in restaurants. I was a restaurant manager all throughout undergrad. And I was like, I'm going to save up and I'm going to move to DC. And then something happened. And I was concerned that I was going to lose my job. And so I was like, I really have to pivot. And what am I doing? I have a bachelor's degree. I should not be working in restaurants anyway. Like, I'm still, in the Midwest. This is not anything that I want. And I just started applying to these AmeriCorps Vista positions. So if you're outside the US and you don't know what that is, we kind of call it like Peace Corps, but domestic. But basically it stands for Volunteers in Service to America. And it's the anti-poverty wing of the AmeriCorps subsidiaries. So the idea is you go somewhere, you live in poverty for a year, and you work in communities to help empower, uplift them, build capacity in nonprofit organizations while also serving those particular people. And I took a job in Wyoming. And I will tell you, Priya, I had nothing. I had my car and $500 to my name and what I could fit in my car and what I had shipped there in advance. I had nowhere to live. I knew no one. I just had this job. And I just set out and drove 18 hours. I was really lucky. Some of my new coworkers, talk about communities of women, let me crash on their floor for a couple of days while I got my apartment and went to training, and really just welcomed me. And these were my coworkers. They were other Vistas. But when I think about that 22-year-old in her two-door Chevy Cavalier driving through the plains of America with no money and no place to live, just like a job and a prayer, I guess, I'm like, there is no way that I would have ever thought I'd be standing here today, And thank God I took that risk. And it was similar when I went to South Korea, right? Like, I didn't know you. Thank God we became roommates, but I'd never been to South Korea. I didn't speak the language. I had learned the alphabet, I think. And it was like, I took these bold risks. And I think you and I have talked about that a lot. I really, when I was younger, took these bold risks because I wanted to explore, and I never knew how beneficial they were going to be. I never knew that this was really creating the foundation for everything that I ever wanted. That job in Wyoming, I ran mediation services and worked with survivors of domestic violence. And it was my first kind of real job in the legal field, right? Moving to Korea gave me more of an international perspective. I came back, I did another AmeriCorps term, and I went to grad school, and then it just kind of kept going. And so I think for me, these like turning points, these like bold moves really shifted everything. And I think if I had like one little nugget that I would say to people besides tell your story, is that take the risk, especially when you're young. Just take the risk, because it's going to take you places that you never even imagined. And I can only say that with 20 years of hindsight, right? So
Oh my gosh. But yes, I totally agree with you. Like, just take the chance. And also, do you find, like, you just shared like a few of these moments where you took a really big risk, made a big move. And I find it actually gets easier to do it once you've done it a couple of times. I actually remember the night before I left for Korea. Until that day, like I felt nothing but excitement. Like I wasn't worried about anything. And then my dad took me to Walmart and he's like, "Oh, you should get like, Tylenol and like whatever, just like basic medication stuff because who knows like how long it'll take you to figure out how to get this kind of stuff there." So I'm like, "Okay, great." And then we're driving home and I think I just realized all of a sudden what I was doing and burst into tears. I was like, "What am I doing? Like I've never been to South Korea. Like I don't know anyone there. Like this random person's picking me up at the airport." Like and I was just kind of spiraling and my dad was just like, "Well, honey, if it doesn't work out, you can just come home." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I can just come home." But I always think about that. Like, I remember when I was leaving my journalism career, I remember thinking, well, you can always go back. Like, you can always come home. And yeah, sure, maybe it won't be the same, but like most decisions, especially career decisions or move decisions, they aren't permanent, right? They don't have to be. And I think we forget about that sometimes. But to me, I'm like, what's worse than taking the risk and it not working out is me always wondering what would have happened if I had done it.
100%.
Yeah. I still remember getting dropped off at the apartment we shared. And like, not only am I moving to South Korea, but I'm going to be living with someone who I've never met before. And you were just so warm, welcoming, like introduced
Who
me to all your friends right away. I just felt so lucky. Like it could have been anyone. And like the fact, like, look at us, here we are, like friends, 2 decades later. Like, okay, not quite that long, but I won't age us too much.
don't
But
tell on us, Priya.
but it's just like even that story is wild. And when I think about actually, as you were talking about the relatability, I'm like, wow, like even you and I, we came from such different experiences and backgrounds, but right away, like we were able to connect with each other. And I think that is like just a testament to everything that you've said so far, being able to like walk into any room and find that those commonalities and also just to be curious and show interest in someone else.
I think that's a lot of it,
Yeah.
honestly. I've always been curious about people that were quote unquote different from me,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And I have always been so fascinated by people's stories. And maybe that's part of, maybe we didn't know it yet, but that was a connecting thread for us, because
Totally.
I tell people this, my favorite genre of books to read or listen to is memoirs. And I just love knowing people's stories and whether there's, the hero's journey and the triumphant overcoming of something, or just I'm talking about my life so that somebody else knows that they're not alone, and I've always been fascinated with people's journeys. There's a joke in DC about the first question that you ask anybody is, what do you do? Talking about your job. And I think I might be like one of 3 people that's not annoyed by that, because I'm like, wait, why do you do that? Why are you passionate about that? What led you here? Like that evokes so many more questions for me, not just, oh, that's just my thing I do for 40 hours a week to make money. No, who are you? I want to know who you are. And I think that has always been something that I've had. And so I don't know if you know this or not, but I had the choice of having my own apartment by myself or having a roommate. And I was like, I don't know anyone. And obviously we had the other teachers at school, but I was like,
Yeah.
I don't know anyone. Maybe I should try having a roommate. Maybe it'll work out and we'll be friends. And well,
I didn't know that.
yeah,
That
I
is
chose you,
wild.
Priya.
Honestly, it was literally, well, of course it was meant to be. Like
Yeah.
that's wow, that is very, very cool. I love that I learned something new today. And Amie, I have to say, like your storytelling during this whole interview too, I actually like the story of your first AmeriCorps Vista experience. I knew, like I knew you had done that, but I don't think I've heard that whole story about quitting your job, the $500 in your pocket. And like I was just like, the storytelling here is next level. So good at like I'm hanging off of every word. And I guess I'm curious, like I've loved seeing you use your stories, use your voice more. And one of the places you've been doing that more in the last few months is on LinkedIn. You're sharing your perspectives, your work, and then of course your story. So what shifted for you and made you feel like, okay, I'm actually ready to put myself out there?
That is such a good question. I mean, I will say the program, but I feel like that's a little bit of a cop out, because I will say this. When I reached out to you about the program, and I think I did tell you this, I'd been like sending every female friend that I had that was in even considering a career change or in the midst of one. I'm like, you have to take Priya's class. You have to talk to her. She is amazing. And I was like, you haven't even taken Priya's class. Go take Priya's class. So I think I was already like starting to be ready and I just needed someone to kind of give me permission. But with LinkedIn in particular, the podcast that I do really did help with that. I think it was like, there's a greater mission to this than just
Yeah.
me. But then through talking to you, I was like, no, I have something to say. I have something to offer here. I have a point of view. And maybe there are other people that would be interested in that point of view. And I think, as you know, it kind of all started. I was thinking about stories and how do I tell my story and how do you merge the personal with your professional, and like, where's the boundary with that? How much is oversharing or how much is just compelling? How much is just relatable, And so
Yeah.
finding that kind of nuance, but it all started with what I call the Jesse Spano story, which is the how I became a feminist. And I remember I sent it to you because I was just kind of toiling around with this idea. And I was like, is there even anything here? And you're like, yes, like, tell your damn story. But it was really like, I think I don't really want to use this word, but like leaning in to who I already was and to stop apologizing for who I was. Right. I think, the term feminist often gets a bad rap for a number of reasons, and I won't go into those. But I think leaning into the spaces where you already belong, leaning into the spaces where people already support and admire and empower you. And I think just trusting myself a little bit more. And you helped me do that. The group helped me do that. But I think kind of what you were saying earlier about taking bold risks gets easier. I think putting yourself out there on LinkedIn is a bold risk for a lot of people. And it was for me, because it's a professional social media, right? It doesn't feel the same as this is my close network of friends that I post my travel pictures. It's like, oh
Yes.
no, I'm like trying to build a portfolio. I'm trying to build a brand. And these were things I never even thought about before. And then it was like, but the job market has changed. The world has changed and I've changed. So what does that look like? And I think, honestly, I've been having so much fun with it. The more I think about what are my stories and what do I have to say and what do I have to offer, and I've just been so excited. Every time I post is like a dopamine hit. I'm like, what if this story like lands something somewhere for somebody? And honestly, I think every time I do it, I just get more excited to do it again.
I love to hear that. And I like right away that I remember that Jesse Spano post, like you got so much response to it. Like there was a lot of engagement, people really resonated with it. And it was the right people, right? It was people who share your values, who consider themselves to be feminists as well, and like who have a passion for like seeing women rise. And that seeing that alignment happen, I think that's one of the things that it's easy to forget about when you're posting because we get really in our heads about like what, like, okay, what do I say? Is this word right? All of those things. But really, I always think about it like your stories help the right people and opportunities find you. And the more you can share them with clarity and authenticity, the more aligned the opportunities and people who come to you are going to be. And I feel like you found that so quickly because even in that first story, like, a bunch of new people started following you and they were all people who you were like, oh my gosh, I'm excited to like get to know this person better. I'm excited to learn about this work. Oh, I didn't know about this feminist publication. And that is some of the power of LinkedIn. It's like, it's not just about collecting followers. Like it's really strategic. And like you said, you're actually building a portfolio and a brand for yourself that's going to help elevate you in your own career.
Absolutely. And I think too what you said about the right people,
Mhm.
because I also have people from my job on my LinkedIn. And, I think you knew I got some positive feedback from even our board members, even our executive directors. Like, I did like a highlight post at the end of the year of some of our wins with women in leadership and law. And she was like, oh, Amy's been doing a really good job of capturing some of this on LinkedIn. And it's like, people do notice. And I think that was the thing. I think I didn't think my stories were worth telling. And every day I'm telling women that their stories are worth telling. And then enter Priya, and you're like, no, your stories are worth telling. And because I think, you hear other people's stories and they sound so powerful and they sound so compelling. And you're like, wow, I haven't done anything remotely like that, except to the other person you have. And I
Yes.
think that's the thing that I often forget is that, you lose sight of your own perspective because you're just so in it.
Yes, that is so true. And that reminds me of what you said earlier about being in the group and other people having the reactions of like, wow, that's so interesting that you did that. And you're right. Like, it's so rare that we think our own stories are interesting. And it's so helpful to have that outside perspective of somebody who's like, no, your story is really interesting and you should share it. I'm glad you touched on that.
Yeah, because I think, especially when you're in like the echo chamber, right? You're like, well, everybody has these stories,
Yeah,
but that's not true. It's really not. And even if they have a similar story, your story is unique to you,
totally.
and your path is unique to you. And there's probably something that somebody can find in that,
Yes.
that they can take from it. I really believe that. I don't think that there's a person that I've been even remotely close to in my life that I haven't learned something from, from a professional
Mhm.
or a personal level. And I think that's, as much as you have to be willing to tell your own story, I do think you have to be willing to listen to the stories of others as well.
Yes, 100% agree. I know there are women listening right now who feel what you felt before you started posting. Like, I know I have something to say, but I don't know how to say it or where to start. So, what would you say to them to help them get past that initial doubt?
Do it anyway. Take the risk. It's so worth it. And your story does matter. Your story matters just as much as anybody else's. Your story has value. Your path has value. What you're doing right now has value. I think, especially as women, it's so easy to get kind of bogged down with the day to day, the emotional labor of family or care, dealing with the patriarchy at work and in society. It's a lot. We have a lot on us. But I will tell you that to other women, your story is everything. And I don't think that I would be doing the job that I did if I didn't really believe that. And I think as much as you're scared to tell your story, find some allies too. Because when you find some women that are willing to amplify your story and amplify your voice, that's just the next level. So the thing that I would tell women is not just tell your own story, as important as that is, but amplify the voices of other women,
Yeah.
amplify their stories too. It's just so critical. We can't do this work alone.
100%. Oh, I love that. What a perfect message for us to end on. And I know after this conversation, people are going to want to find you, Amie. So, where is the best place for people to connect with you?
You can totally find me on LinkedIn, Amie Lewis. I'm pretty easy. I sell it the French way, but I would love to connect. I definitely would love to connect with anybody, obviously in the feminist space, access to justice, but storytelling and narrative change. It's in any sector. If you're doing good social justice work, I want to connect with you. So
Love that. Okay, we're going to link to your profile in the show notes, and we'll also link to your podcast too, because I know
cool.
after getting a taste of the work that you do, I'm sure a lot of people who are listening are going to want to check that out too. So
Well,
thank you
we'd love to
again
have
for
you.
being here. Yeah.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's always a joy to talk to you, Priya, and I'm so excited to hear from everyone.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Likewise. This was such a special conversation. It's like it was a whole journey from our time being roommates in South Korea, talking about the impact you're making now after the Unleash program, and just the way you're stepping into your voice. It's been incredible to witness even through this interview. So thank you for sharing your story. I know it's going to resonate with all of the women listening. And to all of you who are listening, if this episode resonated with you, take a screenshot, tag us on LinkedIn or Instagram. Let me know your biggest takeaway. And if you've been holding back from using your voice, let this be your sign that it is time to start. Until next time, remember your story is the one thing you have that no one else has. I'll see you next week here on Unleash Your Voice.